HB2329 by Representative Pearson. There's no need for a motion or second because we are already back in as we left off. I do have, I'm going to start on the list where we had members that had questions, and that is starting with Representative Gillespie.
Thank you so much, Chairman and sponsor. I just want to make sure before I ask a couple questions, all this is doing is putting back into place a permit system for handguns.
Thank you so much for the question, and yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'll just make a statement and then I'll follow up with a question or two. I think that permits are good simply because they allow for, or they require citizens to have training. It adds an added level of protection for the public through the background check system that's ongoing. It's not a one and done, which is what a purchase is. As we know, when you go purchase a firearm, you have to go through a background check, but that's it. Whereas the permit, whenever it expires, you have to get a new permit, and then you're also randomly selected as well throughout the course of that permit. And then also, I believe that permits help law enforcement. They help identify who should and shouldn't have guns, who should and shouldn't be in a place where they should be, and it also allows them to question someone that may, for whatever reason, be suspicious, or, you know, whether you agree or disagree with the reasons as to why they would stop that individual. It allows the officer to say, hey, I see you have a gun there. Let me ask you some questions, whereas right now that is not the case. For those reasons, I'm going to go ahead and say I do support this bill. I originally voted against the permitless carry bill a couple years ago, and to stick to those principles and to be consistent, to support my law enforcement back home specifically. You know, it's probably a shocker, but I do support this, so thank you.
Thank you. And look, when this was passed, a lot of people had whatever assumptions they had about why it needed to have happened. But the reality that we are experiencing in our state is our reality. And when you look at the facts, you look at the statistics about where we are as it relates to gun violence, if you continue to go along the very same path that got us to where we are, it only allows for more harm. I want to say just one thing because I looked up in our time away from each other, the Bruin decision a little bit more that Chairman Halsey alluded to during, or asked a question about. And as it relates to this legislation, it would not have an impact on it, though we might disagree on some of the merits of the Bruin decision. What the court did say that I think is important for this conversation, Justice Clarence Thomas delivered the majority opinion of the court. And in essence, it says, we too agree and now hold, consistent with Heller and McDonald, that the Second and 14th Amendment protect an individual's right to carry a handgun for self-defense outside the home. The parties nevertheless dispute whether New York's licensing regime respects the constitutional right to carry handguns publicly for self-defense. In 43 states, the government issues licenses to carry based on objective criteria. But in 6 states, including New York, the government further conditions issuance of a license to carry on a citizen's showing of some additional special need. Because the state of New York issues public carry licenses only when applicant demonstrates a special need for self-defense, we conclude that the state's licensing regime violates the Constitution. And so in the Bruin decision, it was particular to this additional purpose someone would have in order to be able to access a license. But as Justice Thomas mentions in his opinion, 43 states issue licenses to carry, and that they are not finding to be unconstitutional. But thank you for raising that point. And if you have more questions about that, I'm happy to answer those too. Chairman?
All right, Leader Lamberth.
Oh, thank you. So as the sponsor of the bill that you seem to be pretty displeased with, I'm curious, if we passed your bill, what would the criminal penalty be for someone who's carrying a firearm without a permit?
Thank you so much for the question. This bill specifically, Leader Lamberth, is going to be addressing what I do think was really not helpful, and you probably know those penalties better than I do, but I do believe, and I want to come to some solution here, that repealing permitless carry would help to fight against this epidemic of gun violence that we are seeing. Now, the reality is we can increase penalties for people who don't have a permit and all those things. But I think a first step and a reasonable step for all of us is to look and say, this isn't working in the ways likely that you or others might have intended. And to address that, we need to go back to ensuring that people at minimum have a permit, have some type of skill, have some type of knowledge about how to use a firearm before they get access to one in the state of Tennessee.
So would it surprise you to know that it's a C misdemeanor?
It doesn't surprise me to know that, and thank you for saying that. But again, what I want us to focus on and would love your input on is how we repeal permitless carry and what other steps we could potentially take in order to end this epidemic of gun violence.
Well, and thank you for bringing that point up. So, and again, you weren't here during this whole debate, and so we went back and forth a lot on this issue. But it's a C misdemeanor. It's the same thing as a speeding ticket. It's the same thing as running as a stop sign. And in almost 20 years of handling criminal cases on both sides of the aisle, a one-time class does virtually nothing to actually make someone safe out there to carry a firearm. Now, what should happen, and what we encouraged as part of this bill, is that if you're going to carry a firearm, you should go through constant training. You should go regularly. Now, the state should not require that. That should be something that you do as a responsible citizen, because there are 399 individuals that were killed in Memphis last year. And I join you in trying to do virtually anything to go after those murderers, go after those repeat violent felons, go after those folks that should not have a firearm. But if we were to do this, and you probably already know this, but again, you weren't here for the debate, and look, you just had not been elected yet. So when I say that, it's just, we were here and we had this big debate on this, on constitutional carry, but you could already carry your gun, and even if your bill passes, an individual who's a law-abiding citizen exercising their Second Amendment rights could already have their gun in their car, their boat, their bicycle, their motorcycle, their business, their home, their friend's car, boat, motorcycle, bicycle, home, or business. And to me, to say that a C misdemeanor, a traffic ticket, which in every court I've ever been in is basically a fix-it ticket. If a law-abiding citizen didn't have a permit and they had a firearm on them, I handled one of these cases one time a couple of years ago. It was a young man that worked late at a restaurant, and his job given to him by the manager was to take the cash home at the end of the day, so the bank from the till, so to speak. And he carried a firearm. He only carried it from the business to his car, because he was worried that somebody's liable to figure out he's carrying cash out to the vehicle, and so he carried a firearm. But one night when he's headed out, an officer was doing kind of a late-night check, stopped him, just as my other friend from Memphis, you guys from Memphis kind of get together on this issue, it sounds like, but stopped him, and he gave him a ticket for this. He came to court. I happened to be involved in the case. The judge said, well, look, could you get a permit? He said, sure. He said, okay, go get a permit. He went and got a permit, and the case was dismissed. It absolutely served no purpose whatsoever. So I'm all about real solutions to get to this problem. We have got to get the rate of violent crime down, not only in Memphis, but throughout the state, but particularly Memphis. We all need to come together because every Memphian is a Tennessean. So just repealing constitutional carry or permitless carry, I've heard it referred to as both ways, in just my opinion, I mean, you ask, is not going to do anything to get to the core of the felons and quite frankly, juveniles and other individuals that are not, that are prohibited from having a firearm now. To just go after law-abiding citizens that have no criminal record but have a right to bear arms, to go after those folks with a ticky-tacky ticket, I mean, just a C misdemeanor, I just don't think gets to the core of it. So I appreciate you bringing the bill. It renews a conversation that we had years ago. I just think there's other things that we could do. And I wanted to throw that out there. I wasn't trying to do a gotcha question, but I mean, the C misdemeanor to me was just, I don't know, something that it just didn't seem like it just went after good folks that just hadn't gotten a permit. So we took that C misdemeanor off the books and said, we're not going to mess with good people that are law-abiding citizens that happen to have their firearm outside all the places I listed. We're going to go after those really repeat violent felons, and we increase the penalty for stealing a firearm. If anybody steals a gun in this state, it ought to be a felony. Well, guess what? Through this bill that we passed, and that's not the part you're repealing, we made it a felony to steal a firearm, regardless of the value. So I just think we ought to focus on the actual criminals out there and leave the good law-abiding citizens alone, even when it comes to a ticket. But I do share your fervor that if somebody is going to carry a firearm, if they're going to possess a firearm, you should learn how to properly use it and store it, and you should not at any time be reckless with that firearm. So I think we're headed toward the same goals. We just got a different way to get there. So Thank you.
Thank you. And look, I want to say two things. One, The reality is the history of relaxing gun laws is a part of what we've been doing in Tennessee. In 2007, the Stand Your Ground laws passed. In 2010, guns and bars laws passed. 2013, just alluded to, guns and truck laws passed. 2014, guns in trunks law is amended. 2018, we overturned firearm dispossession. In 2019, a law is passed making it illegal to give, loan, or transfer a gun to a person who's mentally ill. That's something we were actually happy about. In 2019, a law is passed creating a gun permit for background checks, but that doesn't go much further. In 2021, permitless carry law is passed. We have a long history of actually reducing our laws as it relates to people getting access to guns. That is the problem, and this legislation continues that. And to your point, the reality is we've got a responsibility to do everything possible in order to do something about the epidemic that we are experiencing. And it isn't that this is going to be the fix, a solution. I got a couple more bills coming up that I hope also are part of the solution. But we cannot ignore the reality that by having permitless carry, by not ensuring that everybody who is a law-abiding citizen even has some training, we have set ourselves up for a very devastating situation that we're in. And so, for instance, if you take a class in order to get a permit, you learn about safe storage. You learn about things that could prevent our children from getting access to your weapon and committing suicide. You learn about how to properly use a firearm so that you don't make a mistake and hurt or harm yourself or others. The reality is it isn't about taking away someone's constitutional rights, as you alluded to, or making it more difficult for people just to be able to exercise their constitutional right. It's in order to ensure that every person who gets access to a firearm in a legal fashion, I'm worried about the people who have it legally, are actually educated and equipped with the necessary tools and the skills that they need in order to be able to use it safely. Because it is the negligence that I'm also deeply concerned about, not just the criminals who are misusing firearms. I mean, the reality is we got people, you have to get a license to be able to drive a car, right? Like we have a bill that's already been passed that says young people need to be educated about firearms, but there's no obligation for adults to be educated about firearms. But we say that our kids in K through 12, they need to know. And I believe you're a big advocate for that. But on the other side, there's no obligation at all for parents or adults who are responsible, firearm owners, to be able to get education. Like, that's the problem that I think we need to address. And I think this is just one of those steps to get there.
Gosh, it's tough living in a free country, right, where we stand for civil rights, where we stand in Tennessee for each individual to have the rights guaranteed to them by God and in the Constitution and Bill of Rights. I mean, those civil liberties that you've just, rattled off several bills there where we've continued to expand rights in Tennessee. Thank God for Tennessee, because those individual rights that are included in the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, I don't have to go to a class to say that the police can't search my dwelling without a warrant or probable cause. I mean, you can't do that under the Fourth Amendment. I don't have to go to a class to say under the Fifth Amendment I don't have to give testimony against myself. I don't have to, under the First Amendment, to go to a class to say how you and I, by permission by the government somehow or another, go to a class to say how we can exercise our First Amendment right as we're doing right now. And under the Second Amendment, I don't have to go to a class to say that I have a right to bear arms. Those are ordained. Those are absolutely ordained by our Creator, and they are not something that we should be infringing upon. And so, again, I don't think we're that far apart. We just have a different perspective of looking at it. I will say that you are probably familiar with the phrase post hoc ergo propter hoc. So just because a thing follows a thing doesn't mean it's caused by that thing. There's lots of reasons why we have violent crime in this state. Protecting law-abiding citizens and their freedoms in this state are not why we have crime. We need to get to those root causes of poverty and criminogenic factors like mental health issues and generational crime within families where you have parents that are incarcerated and children that are abandoned by both families and communities, and issues that we can work on. Let's leave law-abiding citizens out of it. That's my perspective.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your comments. But the reality is, though, you might not be able to find exact causation. There is something called correlation. And as you weaken laws across this state and across this country as it relates to guns, you see an increase in the amount of violence and deaths due to guns. That's not accidental. That is something that is being caused by the very actions of of this General Assembly by the very actions of people who have a responsibility and swore on the Constitution not to do things that are injurious. And I'm glad you mentioned the Constitution, because in our Tennessee State Constitution, Article 1, Section 26, it says that the citizens of this state shall have a right to keep and to bear arms for their common defense, but the legislature shall have power by law to regulate the wearing of arms with the view to prevent crime. This was in the updated 1870 version. The people who helped to write the Constitution that we are living under and that we are sworn to protect and to uphold have even said that you have a responsibility as legislators to do something as it relates to the view to prevent crime. And if I am telling you that this reality that we are living in can be changed by the very people who are in this room, by the very people who are in this body, it is woefully sinful for us to only offer consistently thoughts and prayers to our community when we actually got the power to do something differently. I think it is a shame to argue that God has ordained for children to be to die due to gun violence. I think it is despicable for us to say that we throw our hands up and say that individual liberties are more important than the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness of every individual in our state and all the children that we are sworn and have a responsibility to protect. And so while there's always an important balance to live in a free country, a country that whose Constitution actually called me 3/5 of a person for quite some time, let's be clear, but to live in a country that seeks to aim to make freedom a reality, that seeks to aim to make liberty a reality, that seeks to aim to make justice a reality, it requires the very God hands and God feet of the people who are in positions of power to do something differently when they see that the solution that they have offered has failed. And it takes humility to do that. It takes responsibility and accountability to say, you know what, I might have gotten that wrong, but I want to work on it, and I want to fix it, and I want to solve the problem. In this situation, we got wrong, and it's a part of a long streamline of things that this legislature has done as it is related to the relaxing of gun laws that has left us and our communities extremely vulnerable to the epidemic of gun violence. And so this is one step, and there are many more that we need to take. And if you have a budget amendment as it relates to increasing hundreds of millions of dollars for poverty, I will sign on to that. If you have other legislation as it relates to mental health issues and awareness, I will sign on to that, because I do understand we have to solve the root causes of the problems. But we cannot neglect the decisions that have been made by our body that have had harmful ramifications for our community. Thank you, Chairman.
All right, thank you. Next on our list is Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have to, that I felt like my colleague's story actually was a story about what a great example of how the law works. Mm-hmm. Got in trouble for not having a permit. I said, oh, wow, okay, I'll go get that permit, because I knew it was important. And that's how it worked, and it worked well for quite a time. I don't feel the need to carry my weapon with me, but I've grown up around guns and have guns. And so one year I was teaching, and the school police officer was giving a course in gun safety, the 8-hour course, back when it was a real course and you had to go there and take it. And he asked me if I would come and take his course, because it was the first time he ever taught it. And he kind of wanted me to say, as a teacher, how did I do? And I said, well, I've been really curious about the course. I never felt like I needed to take it. But I went and took the course because he wanted me to, and I learned so much. You think you might know enough, you think you know everything you need to know, but he did a great job, because I learned a lot, and I was so glad that I took that course. And why we would remove that as so that we know that people who have these guns are good folks and are going to do the right thing and know what they're doing with their gun is not preventing anyone from doing anything. And I would love to see that, and I would love to see your bill back, because I think that it does make us safer.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Representative Johnson. And again, like we've said, that education as it relates to firearms is important for children K through 12. At minimum, we can say for the people who actually purchase the firearms, education is important for them too.
All right, Chairman Holsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on Bruin, also what Clarence Thomas said was you have to interpret this based on 1796. And when it said shall not be infringed, what does that mean to those people who wrote it? And of course, in that setting, shall not be infringed means you wouldn't have a permit processed to carry a firearm, and you wouldn't have a permit processed to speak, or you wouldn't need to have a permit to exercise your right to write an editorial in the paper, or you wouldn't have to have a permit to go to church. Those are all fundamental issues that you don't have to have a permit to do. Sandwiched in the middle of that is the second. There's also an assumption on your part that lawless people who are willing to kill somebody else are going to obey this law. And they will not, because lawless people don't obey law. So as the representative from Knoxville said, that good folks, law-abiding people, they do go to classes, they do learn, they do what they shouldn't do, or not to do what they shouldn't do. They do learn to teach their children. They do all those things. Lawless people do not do those things. So at the end of the day, I think you can't say that people are safer when lawless people do not obey the law. And on the point of in our Constitution, that has troubled me for a while, and I'm not so sure that the Supreme Court would rule that our Constitution's in error. I mean, our Constitution also says that marriage is between a man and a woman, and we lost that one. So I'm not so sure what they'd say about how our Constitution reads, but I just wanted to point that out, that in 1796, you wouldn't require a permit. They would deal with somebody killing somebody completely different.
Yeah, thank you for that. I definitely think, in reading the opinion, it's over 100 pages long, but if you read even the first 10 pages, they do encourage us to think about the lens of 1796, but they also articulated in the very same piece, and we can go read it together. They use a modern lens when looking at the legislation, because they even articulate the types of weapons and firearms that are used today were not the same that were used in 1796. So they aren't ignorant to the realities that we're experiencing. And Justice Thomas, he again mentions 43 states in his opinion, which is the majority opinion. He says 43 states do have issuance of a license. But the problem with the New York legislation was that it was kind of twofold, that you weren't just getting a license, you had a responsibility to show the reasoning why, and that was what was not permissive. But to the assumption that you're making, lawless people may not support this legislation, but it is actually for the law-filled people. It's for those of good conscience and goodwill who would go to the classes, who would ensure that they had the information, which could really have benefits in our communities. Today, you can go to a store and purchase a firearm, right? A straw purchase obviously comes with significant penalties. But if you are a law-abiding person, you could go and purchase a firearm without knowing how to use it, without knowing how to store it, without knowing all of the consequences that really come with having a firearm and the potential safety troubles that you're actually creating for your young people or the people in your family. My thinking is, Chairman, which I know all of us deeply care about, is to make sure that all of our children are more safe. And if you are a law-abiding person who is getting this firearm, why wouldn't we want for them to be educated about how to store it safely, how to make sure that their kids don't get a hold to it? Like, there's no reason for us not to do that. Because if I keep that same logic, and I'm on transportation, so forgive me, but if I keep that same logic, why then do we get people to get driver's licenses to be able to drive cars? Like, why is that important for them to do? If a vehicle as well could kill someone, a vehicle as well has so many other factors associated with it, but we do that because we want everybody who's on the road to be operating on the same playing field. It's like, you know the rules, you know how a car functions, you know how a car operates. When it comes to firearms, I believe it's important, it's imperative that we make sure that people who have access to them legally, not illegally, the people who get access to them legally know how to use them. Thank you, Chairman.
All right, Representative Fritz.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your passion, Representative. I do. We completely disagree, and you know that.
I do.
But sometimes it's good to dissent, because iron does sharpen iron. You mentioned root cause analysis, and so that implies there's a causal action and some corrective action that can be applied. You would never do a root cause analysis tree and find that an inanimate object were the causal factor in those deaths that we all mourn, and we all do. There sometimes seems to be in your discussion a separation of the reality that the common factor is an evil criminal person that commits those acts. In every single case, there's a person that does that. And there's almost a separation of accountability versus what may be a false sense of security. Our founders, you mentioned the Constitution, and you mentioned the founders and our responsibilities under the Constitution, and to not do anything injurious to the people, to the Constitution. I would offer that it's an abhorrent thing for us to even consider stripping that God-given, that natural right from people just to make ourselves feel a little bit more safe, because there's nothing real to it. It's just a feeling that we're trying to invoke. The last thing I'll offer, and I do have a question at the end of this, because I do appreciate the work you've put into it, I do. That 1870 version of our Tennessee Constitution, have you ever asked yourself why we added those words on to that version?
The first one was quite racist. It says a white man, the free white man of this
let me
state
finish.
have a right to
I've
keep.
still got the floor. Let me finish.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking.
Have you ever asked yourself why we added those words onto that? And it was simply to oppress people. One of the biggest things that we have to do in our roles, I think, is make sure that we're very diligent in not allowing anything to happen that's going to be used to oppress folks in the future. Every time that we have in the history of our nation, I think, done something greatly oppressive to people, and there's been a tyranny of sorts that has taken place, we've departed from that oath to the Constitution that men and women now swear an oath to. So I guess my question for you is this. How do we reach a point so that we recognize that there is the human element of accountability in this and address that? What do you propose that we do there?
Yes, repeal permitless carry. Look, I'll say two things. One, Article 1, Section 26 in 1834, that the free white men of this state shall have a right to keep and to bear arms for their common defense, was what was changed in 1870. A whole lot of other things were changed too, Representative Fritz, that actually hurt a lot of black folks' ability to engage in the political process. You all know 1870. It is the first census post the Civil War. It's the first time that black Americans, African Americans, are considered whole people. My ancestors, Edmund and Sylvia, I'm a seventh-generation Tennessean, were first called people in 1870. But a lot of constitutions in the South changed then to reduce black voter participation. And so I'm not saying that the 1870 version of our Constitution was perfect or that the people were infallible, but it is important that we understand what did happen, and the oppression that you are mentioning and the oppression that I'm mentioning are quite different things. I think giving a legislature power to protect its citizens from crime is important, and we talk a lot about that. And so I don't know if I would agree with you sort of on that point, because a legislature shall have power by law to regulate the wearing of arms with a view to prevent crime. That just kind of makes sense to me. When I think about what we must do, just take this example, and I won't use any names here. An individual in my district ran inside of their house to grab something and to run back in the car because they were going somewhere. In between time, they left their gun on their seat, the front seat of the car. A young boy picked up the firearm, accidentally shot their sibling at 9 years old, and their sibling ultimately passes away due to the gunshot wound. That isn't about a criminal. It isn't about a kid getting a felony or dad getting a felony. That is about an individual who, had they known better, had they had a little more education, had they really understood that this potentially would be a crime, they would have done something differently. And all repealing permitless carry does is to make sure that if you own a firearm in this state, you actually just know the best practices of having it and of using it. It isn't to abridge anybody's rights. It isn't to abridge anybody's freedoms or anything like that. You'll still get access to the weapon. Nobody's taking it from you, right? People who have it now, nobody's going back and taking it. It's just to ensure that the people who get access to a firearm in our state, in the state of Tennessee, we all will know, we all will understand that they have been trained. They do have information about how to use it and how to protect your kids, my kids, nieces and nephews from being, hopefully, from being harmed by this weapon. I would not think, I do not believe that this is the attack on an individual's liberties. They still get access to their firearm. It is just making sure that everybody who has a firearm legally in our state know how to use it. But also, can I say this, Representative Fritz, also know some of the consequences, not only for mishandling it, but for the misuse of it in the commission of other crimes, such as straw purchases. And I think that's something that's really important. It was in the news recently. A guy who committed a crime in Memphis had gotten the firearm from East Tennessee. And it's like, wait, how is this trafficking happening? And so that's some of the education that needs to go on as well, that people who might be legally purchasing these weapons could be then illegally giving it to people who shouldn't have access to it. But there's no way for us to trace or track that without permits. So I appreciate those comments. Thank you, Chairman.
Any other questions for our sponsor? Seeing none, we're now voting to send House Bill 2329 on to full criminal. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No.
The noes prevail. The bill fails. If you wish to be recorded as an aye.